So what we have is the book of Revelation, and it opens up with the title as the first verse. And last week before, we went through chapter 1. And, there's a lot of meat right there in that. And we went through that and found that there was a key verse. So occasionally I'll refer back to that. Revelation 1:19 is the key to the entire book as far as understanding the timeline, right? So John was told, write the things that you see, and he saw Christ among the candlesticks, and then the things that are. Well, the things that presently exist is another way of saying that. So chapter 2 and 3, as we go through it as 7 churches, those are real entities, real places, locations that existed at the time. So when he said the things that are, it was particularly relevant for John because John was the overseer of all of these churches. So just a quick history. Paul established these churches on his missionary journeys in the book of Acts. You can read about that. And then he had an understudy, and there's 2 books in the Bible where he wrote directions and admonitions to his understudy, whose name was Timothy. Okay, so if you know somebody named Tim or Timothy, that's where it came from. Not Muhammad. I looked it up one day and it said Muhammad is the most favored name in the world. Yeah, you can look at. Don't take my. We got AI Google now. You can look up anything. It'll tell you stuff you don't even want to know. So, but at any rate, sometimes I got Alexa in the house. My wife and I are watching something, and Alexa will pipe up and tell us something we didn't even ask for. It's that's AI for you. She's always listening. So I make sure, and I always tell her, Alexa, we love the government, just in case. Just in case. So you can use it to your advantage. Okay. But the book of Revelation, it was written during a time when the government was not as friendly. So John was on the Isle of Patmos because he was a prisoner, because the history, according to some sources, is that they tried to kill him. They couldn't kill him. So they thought, okay, we can't kill this guy. Let's send him to Alcatraz. And so that's what the island of Patmos was. So he's there. And, God goes, I don't care about Alcatraz. I'm getting right down. I'm going right through to you. I got a direct line. I don't care where you are. So he comes down. He gives John this vision. John faithfully writes it down, and we have it, and it's called the book of the Bible, the last book of the Bible, the Revelation, which name of the course, a study of the book. So we see that, this is all very relevant and understandable. You have to know a little bit of history, but even without the history, you can still get glean a lot of encouragement and admonition from these various churches. So if I can get my gizmo to work, come on, Gizmo. Gizmo. Okay, Gizmo is now working. So last week we saw the chapter 1 of things that he saw, which Christ and the lampstands. And then we're going to look and start getting into the 7 churches. Patmos was just off the coast of Ephesus, and Ephesus was the church that Paul started. Timothy then became the head of, and toward the end, John went there with Mary. So John and Mary were there, and John was, I don't want to call him the bishop because they didn't really have a bishop like we think of it today. I mean, he was in a category by himself, the last living apostle, the last person on earth who walked with Jesus. So, I mean, it's not, oh, he's just a bishop. No, this guy, he was the ultimate rock superstar of Christian thing. So when they wanted to hear about the stories about Jesus, they didn't have to go to a book like we do. They just walked up the hill where John lived and said, hey, tell us again. We want to hear this story. So, and as I mentioned before, Jesus said to Peter at one of his last meetings with the disciples after the resurrection, he said, if I want John to live until I come, what is that to you? And ultimately, the saying went around, John wasn't going to die, but that's not what he meant. I believe he meant that he was coming to see him 60 years later and give him the revelation. in the Revelation, he actually saw the second coming of Jesus. So you have to kind of understand the context. It's interesting too that in the last words in the book of Revelation is "I'm coming soon." So Lord, soon. Can we have a definition, please? It's been almost 2,000 years. What's soon? Well, there's soon that we have, and then there's soon that he has. His soon is not our soon. They're different soons. So we have to keep in mind that soon to him means right on schedule, or as the British say, schedule. So we have these 7 churches out here away from the Isle of Patmos. John was at Ephesus. He took care of Mary, as far as we understand, until she was, very old, passed on. And later on, they built churches over these places to commemorate it. And we have in this chapter 4 that we're going to discuss. This was a circuit. It was a Roman superhighway. I have to mention that Ephesus was the first point in the book, and you can see how it was closest to Patmos by this diagram. And Ephesus was one of 4 major cities in the Roman Empire. So, I guess today you could liken it to, what would I say? New York, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, something like that, right? You say, what are the big cities in the United States? It's the same type of thing. So in Ephesus, we have one of those 4 major cities, and we had Rome, of course, the capital of the empire. And then you have Alexandria, Egypt, which was the big empire way before the Romans. And then we have Antioch, which is where the church was first called Christians. So those are the 4 big cities in the Roman Empire. Ephesus was not a backwater. It was a port city. Although today silt has filled up the river, the bay, whatever. And early on it happened. So after this time of the letters, Ephesus slowly became less and less important because the river and the harbor got all silted up. But at that time, it was a very big port city. And of course, what was the main way of getting around then? I think Paul took a 747 at one point. They got me on that one. They caught me. Telling a whopper here. Okay. No, he did not. So what was the best way to get around the Roman Empire? Well, walking was good, but walking was really slow. And Paul obviously and the rest of them did walk around from the 7 churches in that highway. But the real way to get around the Roman Empire was on a boat. I used to work on a ship, and I'd say, I knew the officers. I said, yeah, something about the boat. This is not a boat. This is a ship. So I learned the difference between boat and ship. Boat is a little thing. A ship is a big thing. So, they didn't do too much sailing on boats. They would have been on what they knew as a ship at that time. Of course, the fishermen on the Lake of Galilee used boats. But the whole idea here is that a port city was most important because that's where the commerce would be coming in and out. That's how they conducted business and commerce and transportation. They didn't have semi-tractor trailers. I think that came along maybe, 200 AD or something like that. Has anybody caught me on that one? Nope. It did not come along 200 AD. Okay. Boy. Okay. Anyway, so so basically we had ships, we had horses, we had chariots, and we had foot, right? Pedestrian, peripatetic pedestrian walking around. So, but in this case, if you wanted to be a big city, you most likely would have a port. So we see Ephesus. You can see it's on the bay there, the Aegean Sea, actually. And we can see Smyrna, which has a little port going on there, a little indentation where the ships are safe. And then Pergamum was not really a port city, but it wasn't that far away from the port. Then the other 4 are inland, so they're definitely not port cities. But in this chapter, we're talking about the first 4, if we get that far: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, and Thyatira. So the first one we're going to discuss is Ephesus, and I've seen some pictures of it, and I think Susan has been there. And do you want
2012.
2012? Well, it's not that long.
Not long, a day.
Okay, so Susan was there in 2012 for a day for the recording purpose. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay, so you are on the recording now. I hope you don't mind. The whole world will be listening to this. Anyway, so they had a big amphitheater there, a main drag, main street, whatever you want to call it, right? Most of the Roman cities did, lined with pillars and all the shops. They called it an agora, just meant a shopping place. And then on the other end was the harbor, but they had all the typical, all these cities had the typical accoutrements, whatever you want to call them. They had a stadium, a coliseum, not necessarily a coliseum, some did, but they had sporting events. They had the whole gamut of Roman activities, a lot of worship temples. So what we're going to find is that it's the tour around. I guess that's a good way to put it. We're going to do a tour of the Turkey, Middle East, which was originally called Anatolia, but now in the Roman times was called Asia Minor. And I know this isn't a scale, but I think maybe it's a little like this. Let's pretend Cuba was Alcatraz, was Patmos. Guess that's not too much of a stretch. I grew up in Miami. Talk to some Cubans. You'll find out what Alcatraz is. But anyway, so basically, it might be something like, you go to Naples, that's another church. You go to Tampa St. Pete, you go to Tallahassee, we lived there for a long time, go to Jacksonville, Daytona, and you finally come back to Orlando. But, it's something like that. So that's just a crude illustration. So to bring it to modern times, maybe. We see that we have a chart here, which I got from the public domain, but the chart is very good in the sense of being concise and showing you some of the basic high points and takeaways, like they say in business. What's the takeaway? So Jesus has a condemnation. That's a tough one. And commendation. So say both of those real fast. I dare any of you. And you end up being a babbler. But I can't say them. And counsel and challenge. Now, there's a couple churches where he has no condemnation. And one of those we're going to find out is the martyred church. And the other is the missionary church. But these churches we're going to read about can be viewed on multiple levels, like much of the scripture. So you can look at these churches and study them historically, like I was doing yesterday. I went back over them. Very interesting study. Or you can travel there like Susan did. If you're rich and you got money to burn, you can go over there and, hey, they may give you a deal. You never know. 2-day tour of all the churches in Asia Minor. Forget it, Jack. You probably want a day in each of them to really even get into it. Yeah, $199. Yeah. So, but I've never been over there. I envy people who've been over there. My sister's been over there a number of times. She brings me back things, a shofar, a talit, prayer shawl, beautiful picture of the Wailing Wall, all this, So that's as close as I've been. The artifacts, they're not artifacts, but the things she brings back, the gifts. But as we look at it, Ephesus is our first study here, the first one mentioned, and it's been said that was not by mistake. In other words, these churches were founded by Paul on his missionary journey, his second missionary journey, but and were reinforced on his third missionary journey, but that the order of them actually can have historical implications and futuristic or prophetic implications. So you can look at these as an individual. Of course, you look at these as history. You can look at Wikipedia or anything and find out, just type in biblical Ephesus or whatever. It'll come back with a lot of just factual information. And that's good to know. But you can also look at this as your individual Christian walk. You can read these and say, I wonder where I'm at in these profiles here. Look at it kind of like a maturity profile. Where are you at in the process? and you can look at it as a church. Many people have compared it to your local church. In other words, although every church may have aspects of these, you can target one of these. Now, Philadelphia is the missionary church. And as such, most people consider it to have been a missionary church. I think our church fits there. I can't remember what the pastor said the other week. I think we support like 1,000 missionaries. Anybody remember the number? Anyway, yeah, I think it's around there. I was kind of surprised because that's it's a lot of folks to be supporting. So I'd say we're in the Philadelphia category. But so you have your historical view, your individual, your church view, and the futuristic historical. It's, I guess, prophetic is the way to say that. Now it's history, but you can look at it as it was prophetic when it was first given. And that is that it applies to different church ages. Now, on this chart, it's debatable. I mean, if you believe that this is the case, these time frames very well fit. I mean, hindsight is 100%, right? Nobody in the first century, probably not even Martin Luther's day or Wesley, any of those guys, would have been able to put this together like we do today. So the Ephesus church potentially could have applied to the church era of the first century. So they had the original apostles. They had a great Christian life because they were getting direct. You know, people want to say things like, "Yeah, well, you know, if one of the apostles came to me and told me directly, I'd believe it." Well, these guys had that, right? And you think, oh, then they must have been the greatest Christians ever and had no problems. Well, Jesus, we're going to see, talks about what happened to them. And as human nature is, it's easy to get complacent and take it for granted. So they didn't know what it's like not to have all that. So they kind of got spoiled. I'm thinking of Adam and Eve, right? They never knew what it was like not to have the ultimate life. So they thought, oh, there's got to be something better. And then they ate of the tree, and the woman got fooled. But he gave in. I blame Adam. The woman, you know, she was fooled. Satan pulled one on her. And he went to her first because she was the most spiritual. And so, but Adam, he just gave right into it, right? You know, the guy did not stand up at all to Satan. He bought the hook, line, and sinker. So, but the thing is, the point I'm making is after the fall, it was too late to go back. But now they knew what they had was the best. The grass is greener. So, but at any rate, so the first century church had a lot going for it, but there were some things that ultimately they kind of, down through time, they begin to lack. Smyrna, we're going to find out that this probably represented the church that was after the first century, up until the time that Christianity was made a legal religion in the Roman Empire by the Emperor Constantine. So, you know, you say that's great, right? You say that's wonderful. It's so great. And I'm sure all the saints who had been witnessing the martyrs firsthand knew martyrs. I'm thinking we were watching the Israel conflict over there. And one guy said there's 1 degree of separation between any Israeli and somebody who was killed or taken hostage. But I don't want to focus on that, but I'm just saying it's kind of like that. I think in these times, in the Smyrna times, which historically might have been between 100 and 312, the odds are that every Christian knew somebody, 1 degree of separation between them and somebody that was martyred. So, I mean, the Christian community wasn't huge by then, not like it was to become later. So interestingly enough, in that time of great persecution, Jesus has nothing bad to say about them. It's one of only 2 churches. And then we go to Pergamum. And that church, we're going to find out, in that city and everything about it had to do with compromise, heavy compromise. So once the persecution stopped and they were received by the Roman Empire, and particularly after 381, when Emperor Theodosius made the Christian religion the religion, and he made everybody in the empire be a Christian. Well, what happens when everybody has to be a Christian? There aren't many Christians. They're going along to get along, you know? Well, I'm a soldier. I want to fight. I want to eat. Sure. I got 1,000,000 guys. Hey, Christ is good. Sure. We'll add them on. That's what happened. That's called syncretism. Fancy theological word where you take other beliefs like pagan beliefs and Christian beliefs and put them together. And that's what happened. So the church became watered down and God was not happy with that. But we are going to leave the other three for later. It may take a couple Sundays here to go through these first ones. The first four churches, chapter 2. Okay, to the angel of the church of Ephesus write. And I mentioned before that word is messenger. So rather than saying exactly what it means, I'm just going to say messenger. So think about it that way. To the messenger of the church. These are the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. That's a reference back to chapter 1. So, John, in like almost timeless wink of an eye, was looking at that, and now he's talking about this. Jesus is showing him this. So he's reiterating what John saw in the way of the 7 candles, and those are explained in chapter 1 in the context. Just again to reiterate, almost everything, if not everything, in the book of Revelation is explained either in the book or in a Old Testament or previous prophecy. So there are no mysteries in that sense. I should make that clear. Apocalypsis means to unveil or to get rid of a mystery. So apocalypsis in the Greek would have been used. The best example I know today is like an art gallery opening or something, or an artist that has a new display of his latest works. And if he's a sculptor, they have a sheet. It's probably better than a sheet, but they have something covering it, right? And so the moment that the artist removes that sheet, that is called apocalypsis. Before, it was a mystery. But once the sheet's removed, you know what it is. It has been unveiled. And that's the meaning of Revelation. In the Greek, the word is apocalypsis. But Mel Gibson made a movie by that title, but Apocalypse or something like that. But it had nothing to do with this. The world uses the terms all over the place. Let's see what he says to Ephesus, verse 2. I know your deeds, your labor, and your perseverance. That's interesting because they worked hard, they labored for the cause, and they stuck it out. They persevered. I know that you cannot tolerate those who are evil, and you have tested and exposed as liars those who falsely claim to be apostles. Okay, so in the context, looking back of what we know about the early church, there were false apostles and teachers that infiltrated the early church. Now, if you read any of Paul's letters, that's you find it other places, but in the letters is where you're going to find the brunt of it, and particularly Paul, because these guys were mainly of two varieties in their world, and it's probably not totally like today, but some aspects are, in the sense that there were two types of infiltrations, if you boil it down and make it simple. The first was the people that Paul loved and was trying to win over. Remember, he always went to the synagogue first. But there were those people in the synagogues, and especially in his case, Jewish people that followed him around for the express purpose of attacking him and stopping what he was doing. So, they would have liked to kill him when he was in Jerusalem, and they tried. But, when he's out among the Gentiles, it was kind of like it was a different sport, different rules. So they just didn't outright try to kill him all the time. They did stone him in Lystra, if you remember. But the whole idea here is that these people that were following him, in many cases, were the Jews, and they were Jews who were against Christ. They did not believe Jesus was Messiah. And he's pretty hard on them later on in this letter. Jesus is. You say, oh, that's John. No, Jesus is giving him this stuff. So before you get too harsh about your criticism of what's said here, just keep in mind, the lion is talking. We've seen the lamb, but the lion's talking now. You don't want to mess with the lion. I'm telling you right now. Not a good move. So he's talking to them. Jesus is the ultimate pastor, so he's got two things going here. He's being the pastor, loving and kind and trying to grow them in himself, in Christ, and then he's also letting them know squarely when things aren't right. So you might say he used tough love, I guess. I don't know if I could say that. That's what we say today, right? So Jesus is not the kind of parent just says, I'm not going to say her name, but when I was young, one of my friends had a child, and she was married and she had a child, and because they had some money, they started going to something called Montessori school. And I don't know, I can't say anything bad about it. I don't know how it is today. I'm sure it's different today than it was back in the you remember that, right? Did you guys live in the okay, anyway. So but at any rate, so back then things were different. But I went over to the house one day, just a quick visit, and the kid was drawing with a crayon all over the walls of the house. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, oh, yeah, that's the new method. That's the new theory and the new thinking. We go to Montessori school, and they said, we don't want to curb the child's creativity. And so you look at what's happening out there today, that way of thinking has infiltrated the entire society. Back then, I thought she was cuckoo, but I'm going to, don't bring the kid to my house. I will curtail him. Yeah, so I couldn't believe, I was incredulous, But then again, she was a hippy dippy kind of person. Okay, let's see what we got going here. So all that's to say that Jesus has these two aspects, commendation and condemnation. But there's the loving pastoral Christ, and there's also the Christ who is going to give us some boundaries and tell us when things aren't right, if we listen. And it says here that false apostles and teachers. First of all, I want to clear up something that may, because that word figures, importantly in many of these writings, that the apostle, the word is from Greek apostolos. And you don't need to know Greek, but I'm making a contrast here. Apostolos meant someone who was sent out to do something, right? So if you let's use in military sense, if they were going to send somebody out to start a new military base, they'd send an apostle. That person was an apostle. He was sent out to establish the base. That actually in the Latin, which is what the Romans would have been using, corresponds to the verb missio, and missio means to send. They mean the same exact thing. So apostolos, we in the English is a noun, we call it apostle. In the Latin, the Roman language, they called it to be sent out a missio, a mission, basically, and that meant that somebody was a missionary. An apostle in the Bible is a missionary. I had some experience as a young person with a church that only believed that there was a pastor teacher. They called the pastor teacher. And they had missionaries, and they had evangelists, but the rest of them didn't exist anymore. They taught they'd gone out of existence. Well, so, because of the confusion of language, that's why language is so important. There's people out there saying they're apostle such and such. And if they're at the church down the street, they are not an apostle. If you're an apostle, you're a missionary. A missionary means you're sent out where there is no church to plant a church. That's what Paul and all of the apostles, the actual apostles, did. It's like, who's the guy that went to India, was run through by a sword? Got a mental blank. But anyway, so all 12 of them ended up in different places where they went out to plant churches ultimately and were martyred, except for John. But just to be clear, so there's a lot of people that claim various things, and this day they also did. People were coming on and saying, going, I'm an apostle. You must listen to me. I got this great word from God. I'm an apostle. And Paul and the rest of them would constantly, John would constantly have to say, watch out for these guys. These guys are not apostles, and because a tree by its fruit, right? So the main thing that the apostles have to do, of course, is plant churches, but also the teaching has to be right on the money, because they have to teach the people they plant. And the teachers also came from a different school. So we had the Judaizers. It's not the word in the Bible as such, but that's a theological term used. So the people that followed him around and said all the Christians have to be Jews. You have to be a Jew to be a Christian. And that was the whole reason why the Acts chapter 15 council was held. Paul went there and met with all the apostles, and they had to have a big discussion about it, because just to put it in perspective, most of the Jews in the Jerusalem church, which is a pretty much all Jewish church, said, no, you have to be a Christian to be a Jew to be a Christian. And if you go back and read chapter 15, you'll see there's only three things that they had to do. And the only one applies to us today is in a direct way would be abstain from fornication. But the other two had to do with idols, strangled with blood and sacrificing to idols. So that was prevalent back in that time. But the whole idea here is that you don't have to be a Jew to be a Christian, but these people were one strain of the two that were coming against them. The other strain, which we actually have more today, I don't have any Judaizers following me around today. I believe in supporting Israel, but I also know that according to the word, Galatians 3:28, that the Jews have to be saved like everybody else. Somebody's a Jew and they're not born again, then they're not a Christian and they're not saved, okay? God's promises are still on the nation of Israel. And like I've said before, they're going to win this thing. They're going to win this thing because God is with them as a nation, but the individual Jewish person has to be saved. So some people call those completed Jews. But the other side is the Gnostics, and you're not going to find that word in the scripture itself, but you are going to find the term in the Greek. So Gnosticism, gnosis, it comes from the Greek word gnosis, and gnosis means to know, knowledge, to have knowledge. And so we see that all over the world today. Today it's called by a different name. It's not called Gnosticism. Today it's called New Age. It's called humanism. But the beliefs and the teachings of those people are no different. And they will come into your church and they will have their own churches. And basically, they're tolerant of anything and everything. The only thing that matters is how much you know, and that you can come to God by getting greater and greater knowledge. And they had a very elaborate system of kind of like what's that Tom Cruise thing he's into? Scientology, thank you. It's neither scientific neurology. So, but the thing is that they believe they have different levels. It is a type of Gnosticism that as you are indoctrinated into these different levels, the highest level they have is called an operating thetan. An operating thetan is when you get to go out on the cruise ship, the yacht that they own. But anyway, like I'm sure Tom is out on that yacht all the time. But so basically, you go through these systems until you finally achieve, Hindus call it nirvana, not Hindus, Buddhist, but Hindus have their own view on it. But all these systems, whether it's a religion or an ism, they all believe in the same thing. You're going to become righteous through knowing more and more and more. Your mind is going to save you. So Gnosticism is with us. Gnosticism didn't die with Paul and John. It's been around, and I would say it's worse now than ever, because back then they didn't have radio and TV and media. So almost everything. I mean, I stopped even pointing it out. Sometimes I'll point it out to the wife when we're watching something. I'm going, oh, that's this, because everything I'm hearing, there was a rabbi and a priest on the show the other day, and the rabbi says his bit. The priest goes on and he says, well, we got to love each other because we're all the children of God. And I go, boy, that's the most ignorant thing I've ever heard. The Bible teaches, as many as receive them, he gave the power to become what? Well, how can you become if you already are? The Bible in no way teaches we're children of God. We are creations of God. Unless you're born again, you are not a son of God or daughter of God. So anybody that says something like that, immediately go, antennas up. This guy's a false teacher. Because and you hear it everywhere. It's everywhere in the media. And that's a type of Gnosticism. We're all children of God. We just need to learn how to live better, self-help, everything's self-help. We're going to become better. We're going to do our yoga. We're going to study some kind of mind science. We're just going to become these great super beings, hopefully with the implanted chip, with the Musk implant chip, transdural neural plural, whatever it is, we're going to be gods. And that's what the Gnostics thought. They're going to become gods by this increasing knowledge. But anyway, I'm trying to set the stage because you're going to hear this over and over here in this chapter in the next. Okay, so these guys endured a lot, but it says they've abandoned their first love. And the first love, of course, is Christ. And this can happen to us. It can happen to a church. And it happened apparently more in the first century toward the end of it, where the original apostles had died off, John was left. And so that one-on-one relationship, probably a lot of it has to do with what's happened in my lifetime. I mean, it's like I've been looking at Barna studies and these other Christian studies, and it shows that young people of college age and college age educated particularly and older, they're not going to church. Usually it's couched like this: we don't believe in formal religion. We believe in just the world is my oyster. I go to church every Sunday on my fishing boat.
But you don't have to go to church to be a Christian.
You don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And although that is true, if you are a Christian, you're going to want to be together with other believers, not because it's a law, because you want that fellowship. You miss that fellowship, you know. So that's a whole different topic. But yeah, so that's that's the way that goes. And it's not something new. You go, oh, that's just something in the 21st century that's occurred. No, in the very first century they had this type of thing. I believe he's intimating some of that. We know from history what happened. Be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Okay, therefore keep in mind how far you have fallen. Repent. And it's important to know that repent. Oh my gosh, where's the time go? I have to repent of going over